Hi, this is Wicca and Witchcraft 101 with High Priestess Tehila from the Coven of the Open Mind. This is our 5th lecture. I called it Evocation Academy because we're just going to run through all the different types of evocation. I expect that a lot of it might be kind of hard to understand and there might be a lot of questions. You could always feel free to leave a comment or shoot us an email at covenoftheopenmind@gmail.com. I'm happy to answer any questions, especially when we get to some of the tougher stuff later on in this lecture. So to start off with, let's remind ourselves, evocation, this is when you're generating energy from yourself and sending it out into the external world, as opposed to invocation, which is when you're taking energy in from the outside world. In this case, you want to use a circle specifically to keep the energy in. The reason for that is twofold. So for one, if you're doing something like enchanting or sigils or something like that, if your energy is constantly kind of leaking out into the world around you, then you can become really exhausted by the working. And likewise, if there's any risk of invocation, you want to keep any kind of risky energy out, then that's another reason to have a circle as well, which does come into play here. But the most important reason why you should have a circle during evocations is because it tends to be more effective when you generate all the energy and then send it out into the world all together in one big blast of, kind of high speed, high vibration energy. Evocation is used for spells of any kind of situation where the seeker desires to exert their willpower on the world directly. So you can also exert your willpower just by, trying to make a change, communicating with people, trying to convince them to change their perspective. You could pray to the divinity if you believe in that. But in Wicca, we believe that we are empowered. We believe in the divinity of self. So evocation invocation is more about kind of transforming ourselves. Normally, ritual is a very transformative experience, and evocation is more about transforming the world around us. So I wanted to break it down into two different types of evocations. I'd like to kind of put a disclaimer right here on the slide. A lot of people have a lot of different definitions for all these different things. You'll find in different types of Wicca, it's all different forms of paganism. So I am trying to be as inclusive as possible. You'll see that I use some terms a lot differently than some people use them. And in fact, I tend to, define things a bit more broadly because I want to be all-encompassing. So that being said, there are two different kinds of evocations. One of them is very straightforward. Everyone agrees with this one. When you generate the energy from yourself and then just direct it out into the world or direct it into a candle or a sigil or some kind of physical object, something like that. Examples are spellwork, sigils, consecrations, etc. We'll go into each of these in more detail in just a moment. The other kind of evocation, and this is the one that can maybe a little controversial, but the other kind of evocation is when you cause another person to generate energy, or you borrow energy from another person, and you're just the one directing it. And the reason why that's an evocation is you're not really invoking it. The energy is never coming into you. Bringing in another person's energy, especially if it's not filtered, can be dangerous. And we'll talk about why, because there's different dangers for the different kinds of energies. So I'll break that down later. But it's still an evocation because, the other person is still required to generate energy. And anytime someone is generating energy, that's evocation. And so if this doesn't really fit into the evocation category, and it doesn't really fit into the invocation category, like where does it go? So I put it in the evocation category. It fits in really nicely, and you'll see that as we go through some of these things. What exactly these different types of spellworks have in common will become very clear to you as we step through them. Before we get started, though, with the different types, I want to talk about how to raise energy. Raising energy is the most important part about evocations. Now, you can use invoked energy for evocations. You could invoke deity and then turn around and evoke that in order to have a more powerful spell. But in this case, we're just talking about the times where you raise the energy yourself. And there's different techniques. Some work best for different things. So if you're trying to do some kind of spell that helps you take things more seriously, or helps you stay dedicated and focused in your schoolwork or something like that, then you might find meditation or yoga or something that's like kind of more solemn and easygoing. Even playing the drums, but maybe just different rhythms work best for different things, right? Whereas instead, if you're trying to bring luck or happiness or fertility, that's going to be like dancing, having a lot of people running around a bonfire, singing. And then you'll find that there's some things that could go either way. Like I said, you could have very fast, rapid-paced drumming for happy things, or you could have slow, steady drumming for meditative drumming for something more solemn. You could do chanting that is, either or. You could write incantations that are either or. So these techniques, there's no one size fits all to spell work. There are many, many right ways of doing things. But there are also wrong ways of doing things. So there are some things that are just not going to work. Now, if drumming rapidly and excitedly helps you get your focus on, by all means do that. That's not what I'm talking about when I say that it's not going to work. But there are some things where it's just like, for example, if you're trying to use an orange candle for binding or banishing, it's not really the best because it's just the wrong vibes. And hopefully you guys will come to see that as well as you start working with some of these things, that I'm not just like making up these arbitrary rules. I really do think that there is kind of a right way to, well, there's no one right way to do it, but there are sometimes wrong ways to do things. So different incenses and lightings and candles all help raise different kinds of energies as well, and this comes in with the vibe. So different herbs, different types of light, different types of candles, all of these things have different vibes, and the vibes help you to alter your mind. The tools, the vibes, all of these things, that's the point of them. It should be easy for you to get into an altered state of mind if you have, a wand in hand and a crystal in another, and you're just like, these are my tools that I use for this practice, so as soon as they're in my hands, my mind is in the right place to do that working. That's the idea. All successful magic really is about putting your mind in the right state of being, putting your mind in the right place, and just kind of aligning your physical, your subconscious, your emotional, and your spiritual, all of the levels of your existence, kind of just aligning everything and getting everything on the same page so it's very clear and obvious what you need to do and how you're going to go about doing it. So the first type of evocation, and the most basic one, is spells. You're going to see a lot of these same themes throughout the later slides, so if you want to take a moment to copy this intent, desire, commitment down, I definitely recommend that. I will be referencing this throughout the rest of the presentation. So in order for a spell to be successful, you have to have these three things. So remember I talked about a right way and a wrong way of doing things? There are a lot of right ways for you to get these three things like checked off the list. But if you don't have one of these three things checked off, then that would be the wrong way of doing it. It's just not going to work, So the intent is the belief that the spell will work in a specific way. And it has to be specific. So, for example, if you want to lose weight, you can't just say, I want to lose weight, because what happens if you then get sick and you lose weight because you're in the hospital and you're not eating? Obviously, that's not what you wanted, right? So instead, you should break it down and be like, I want to lose, 2.5 pounds a week. I'm going to have this diet plan and this exercise plan, and these are all my goals, and everything is set out. That is the intent, okay? The desire is the real emotional investment in the success of the spell. So if you are really, really committed to losing weight, you want it even on the most subconscious level, then it's not going to seem hard to you to choose to eat healthy over choosing to, eat something less healthy. Actually, let me just make sure Facebook's not making notifications as well. 1 second, I'm going to pop. And we're back. Okay. Normally I remember to do all of these things before I start this, but Mercury retrograde, so I got to remember to slow down and really focus on the things required to have good communication, since that Mercury retrograde energy is really affecting me lately. So, okay. So, the desire is the emotional investment. If you really subconsciously deep down, what you want is to, and now they're going to appear up here on my notifications as well. If deep down you really want, you really want this to occur, it'll be really easy for you to act in such a way that you can have it. So like the largest, so I am also an online nutritionist separately from the coven. That's why you'll see there's some nutrition articles written up on our website and our blog. I'm very interested in it. I build online nutrition plans for people. So that's just one of my interests. So one of the things that I commonly see in people who don't have success with weight loss is that they don't really want it. It's like they consciously want it. They're like, I want to be thin, but they don't want to live the life of a thin person. They don't want to cut back on their food. They don't want to eat less sugar. They don't want to work out. So do they really want to be thin, or do they only kind of want it, right? So that's where the spell work comes in. The spell is basically, the magic here is what aligns our desire with our intent, okay? And then the last little bit here is the commitment, the willingness to physically act to back up the spell work. So if you have this whole elaborate spell planned out for weight loss and you do it, but then you go right back to your old habits of eating too much sugar and not being physically active, well, then you're not going to lose the weight, right? So depending on what your goals are, you're going to have to actually act in such a way to see those goals through to fruition. Magic is not a supernatural experience. Now, there are forms of magic that kind of circumvent that. They can be very dangerous, but they can be very profitable as well, and we will talk about them. But when we're doing basic spell work here, the most basic components, we're talking specifically about aligning our desires, our intent, and getting to a place where it's easy to follow through. It's easy to have the commitment. Now, the way to construct a spell, first you want to kind of sit down and ground and center, close your eyes, calm down, make sure that you're in a good place emotionally to be deciding what you want, what you don't want. Otherwise, you could come up with a spell that's like too extreme or something like that. You want to clearly define the goal, and it should be as specific as possible. This is for a lot of reasons. You don't want to accidentally, have some kind of side effect that you weren't planning on because it's manifesting in a way you hadn't foreseen. Then you decide what supplies you need. Do you need a pink crystal? Do you need a green crystal? Do you need candles? Do you need incense? You gather all the supplies, consecrate all the supplies. This step also includes, should you do this on the full moon? Or should you do this on a waning moon? When should you do the spell? We'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. Finally, when you're ready to do the spell, everything's gathered, everything's consecrated, you've got the goal clearly defined, you already wrote the words of power, also called an incantation, you're ready to go. So now you sit down, you want to visualize the goal in your mind. So we talked about visualization in a previous lesson, and actually in response to some of the issues of a few of the coven members, I want to put a caveat in here. So visualization is not a requirement to spell work. It's like blasphemy. Okay, you'll go to any coven and they'll say the opposite. You have to be good at visualization or you'll never get it done. I don't agree with that. Visualization is a very useful tool. If you can get the picture in your mind's eye and you can really just like see it happening, that is very helpful. But why is it helpful? It's helpful because it makes you feel, it makes your emotions align, right, with the intent. So when you can see yourself being thin, you can see yourself getting that promotion, whatever it is, when you see that in your mind and you really see it, and you see it so strongly that you can actually feel what it would be like to have that success in your life, that can actually do wonders to get you emotionally invested. So visualization is a tool to allow the desire to really become a really solid manifest thing, but it's not a requirement. If you're able to just like kind of put yourself into an altered state and feel the energy, feel what it would be like when you get that promotion, feel what it would be like to have, whatever 20 less pounds on you, like that's my goal. If you could just feel what it would be like, then that is often enough. Now, if you can do both of those at the same time, that's even better. But I will say that for some people, visualization can actually be a distraction. I mean, the purpose or the requirement here is that you're not really thinking consciously. You have to put your conscious mind in a place where it can't get in the way. As we read about in Peter J. Carroll's book, The Liber Newell, a lot of that book is is not related to this. It's related to chaos magic. But I think that the first, couple chapters of it give some of the best description of how to do magic that there is. You need to really put yourself into a state of non-thinking, or what's called gnosis, a state where you can't have ego get in the way. You can't have self-doubt. A lot of people's spells don't succeed because they don't really want them to. They're scared of what it might entail, or there's a part of them that just doesn't believe in it. So you have to really push all those things aside in order to be successful. Even if you subconsciously don't believe it will work, it's not going to work. So you have to put yourself into a state of non-thinking and really, really get to a place where you are sure the magic will work. In fact, if you do a spell and you don't know that it was successful immediately, like you can't feel that it will work, then it was not successful and you'll have to do it again. When you do a spell that's really successful, you'll know even before the outcome comes to fruition, you'll know that it was successful. And finally, you want to chant words of power. Usually it's 2 to 4 lines. It's usually rhyming. It's poetic, and I'll give some examples of that in a few minutes. At the end, you'll want to record the spells in your Book of Shadows. You'll put the date, time, moon phase, things that could be relevant. And then when it's known, the outcome. And the reason for that is maybe it didn't turn out exactly like you wanted. Maybe there was some caveat that you didn't expect. If that's the case, then next time you go to do this kind of spell work, you're going to want to make a note of that and make some adjustments. So that's why you write it into the Book of Shadows, just so that you're not making the same mistake twice. Okay, so here are the associations for spells. This kind of goes along with the chakras. It also fits into all of the rest of the things we'll be talking about, so you may want to just copy these things down as well into your Book of Shadows so you have them. You'll notice, a lot of these are just obvious, they make sense, like red, vitality, success in battle, passion. Oh, but here's grounding. Maybe that one's less obvious, right? But grounding, because red is the color of our root chakra. Okay, so pink is obvious, love, friendship. And then you get to orange, creativity, reproduction. Yellow, will, motivation. It aligns perfectly with the chakras, right? So then you have green, that's money, abundance, wealth. That one doesn't align as well, but that's because the heart chakra is both green and pink. So you see the love kind of in both of them. And if you think about it, wealth does kind of align with the heart chakra, because someone who has a big heart is always wealthy. Blue is healing. Purple is leadership, mysticism, and divination. Again, third eye chakra, that's what it's associated with. And when you get to white and black, you see they have a lot of overlap. So you have the purification of white and you have the banishing of black. So you could think about it like white attracts positivity and black banishes negativity. Both of them can be used for divinity work. Both of them can be used for spirit work. But white is also very multi-purpose. It does contain all of the wavelengths of light, so you could kind of use it for any of the spells you want to do. With black, you have to be a little careful, though, because black is a spell of binding, so sometimes it can attract energies that you might not want to use in your spell work. If you have a really good circle, then that shouldn't matter, and black could be multi-purpose as well, but most of the time people don't use black for just about anything. Most of the time, if you can't find a colored candle, you'll just use a white one. The moon phases also are relevant. We talked about in the previous lecture the concept of cardinal, fixed, and mutable. So, cardinal energy is waxing, it's attraction, beginning, and birth. And then the fixed is when the moon is full. That's the creative, actualized energy. They exist in full energy and full force. It's the best time for divination. It's the best time for anything that pulls on intuition, etc. The waning moon, that's the mutable, okay? That's banishing, ending, death, and also rebirth to some extent as well, right? Because that's mutable energy. However, because there's kind of this new dark moon phase, that can kind of take the place of the rebirth aspect as well, the dark moon, which aligns with dark goddesses, like Caratwin, for instance, or Hecate. Now, some people call it the dark moon, and they believe that you can't do magic on the dark moon. Still, other people will say that you can't use the energy of the dark moon in magic, but you can pull from either the waning or the waxing aspect of the dark moon, depending on which one you're closer to. And then even more people will say that you can do magic on the dark moon, but the most powerful kind of magic on the dark moon is actually that which uses death energy instead of life energy. And Wicca is primarily focused on magic that involves life energy and almost completely neglects death energy entirely. You will find necromancy, like necromantic witches, I'm one of them. There's lots of them, especially in Salem, Massachusetts, here in the United States. But most Wiccans, I think, would use the dark moon instead as a time of rest and introspection and healing, and less for magical workings. A lot of people will use it for spirit work instead of anything that has to do with kind of affecting change in this plane of existence where life reigns. Okay, so here's some examples. Oh, there's one typo here, so I should have corrected that. So the second incantation has a typo, so I'll mention that. But so for the first one, it's just a peace of mind spell, something to help you get along with people. You can see here it says, "Salt of sea, wind, moon, and sun, bring peace to me, O mighty ones." Okay, so this isn't a prayer. You're not saying, "Please, great beings who are so great." You're not using the many names of God or the goddess. You're not pulling on anything, particularly divine. You're not invoking any divine energy. Instead, you're kind of just demanding, this is what will happen. This is what's going to be the case. The people that are tough to get along with are going to be easier to get along with because I said so. So mote it be. So will it be. That's what that means. And that's really at the essence of Wicca, and why I use this as an example. It's because, you'll find spells where it's like a demand, and that is something that we believe is okay here. We believe that we are empowered and that we have divinity of self. The tools that you would use for this spell, a blue candle, okay, that's calming, healing, and then you might use a blend of different scents like chamomile, lavender, and frankincense. Obviously, chamomile and lavender are very peaceful and calming. Frankincense, however, is a little less obvious, but frankincense is one that kind of brings alignment with higher understanding. It's often used for like divinity and in relation to the gods. So in this case, I threw it in there because this is an example of a spell where you might actually invoke divinity as well, and before you do the evocation. The second one here, this is an example of one where there's definitely no divinity being invoked. This one's kind of a banishing spell, and you could choose to use a poppet or not, but I don't really want to talk about the poppet for now because that would involve binding, so we'll talk about that later. So for now, just imagine using a black candle and some sage, okay? So you would light the black candle, you might smudge yourself with sage, smudge the room, smudge the house, smudge everything, sage everywhere. Sage is a very purifying scent, and that's the reason you're trying to get rid of negativity. And then the incantation for this one is, "Need not this strife be gone from me, may elsewhere your distractions be." So you're not really like trying to hurt anyone, you're not cursing anyone, you're just saying, I want this negativity gone from me, take your bullshit somewhere else. That's basically what you're saying. I don't need this strife, be gone from me, may elsewhere your distractions be. Just go be your same person somewhere that's not in my vicinity, and you're cleansing your energy in the process. Banishing past energy and cleansing the energy that remains with the sage smudge stick. Okay. So some other techniques, you could use powders of various forms. You could sprinkle it in your shoes or on the hearth. Sprinkling in your shoes maybe for good travel or good luck in travel, or for if you have actual issues with your feet, you could sprinkle in your shoes to like help heal your feet or help keep them from hurting while you're walking, or help you run faster, something like that. On your hearth, maybe to like keep energy out, or to create a barrier that will protect you from negative energy coming in. Another technique you could use, you could fill bottles with different combinations of materials, and then you could bury them outside, or you could just hang them somewhere in your room. There's different things you could do with them. So if you look at the pictures on this slide, you'll see some different kinds of bottles. A lot of times they're sealed with wax. As you can see, it looks really cool. The wax doesn't always look like this. It can look any way you want. So like this is what I'm talking about. There's a lot of different right ways to do things. And it's really witchy to come up with different ways of doing them. So if you're like, this doesn't really work for me, let me try something else, let me try something slightly differently, let me make a few adjustments, that is a really witchy attitude to have. Now, of course, there are some things that are just not going to work. So if you're trying to purify space with urine, it's not going to work because urine is dirty and baneful, but if you're trying to purify space with menstrual blood, maybe you'll put some in a bottle with cleansing herbs like rosemary and sage, and you'll bury that outside your door. That could be an example. Or if you're trying to banish something, you could put urine and baneful herbs in a bottle and bury it. You could put glitter and fruity herbs in, and that could be for luck or to attract fairies, like the one charm here with the little pendant on it and the little bottle here. So that's an example of something that might attract fairies. Another thing that you can do is you could use a poppet. A poppet is a doll. It's usually made with bits of the person who you're binding to the doll. The idea is that you bind their energy to the doll, and then, and it must be bound to be effective. We'll talk about that. You're binding their energy to the doll, and then if you bury it, that could be, sometimes it might seem like what you're doing has some interpretation that is negative, right? So burying a doll that's bound to a person, is that like trying to kill them or something? Like, no. The important thing is the intent, right? So if your intent is just to get rid of their energy, and burying their poppet is just symbolic of that, then that's not really going to hurt them in any way, right? So the intent is what really matters, not the actual act of what you're doing. Now, if the act of what you're doing doesn't go with the intent, the spell will just be less effective. And you can see a picture of a poppet here. There's lots of different kinds of poppets. You can picture the traditional voodoo doll. Those are poppets, something like that. It doesn't have to have bits of the people in it. You can still bind their energy to it, but it's more effective if it does. So like maybe like a handkerchief that they owned, or some hair or something. And poppets don't have to only be for curses too. You could bind the spirit of a ghost to a poppet so that you can more easily connect to them. Or something like that, so that you can do some kind of working with it. You can bind the energy of, say, yourself to a poppet, and then give it to your child, so that if you go away on business trips, they still have something that feels like you. And in fact, this is actually a common thing, binding our energy to physical objects. Like, someone's out of town, so you like sleep with their sweatshirt over your face because it smells like them. That is the same kind of idea. Obviously not with a poppet, but same idea. You could strew. That means to spread around on the ground, like the flower girl is strewing flowers down the aisle, and the idea is that that will bring good luck to the bride, right? So that is exactly like this. That is a form of magic. You could burn herbs as well. You could write on papers. You could strew papers or glitter, anything like that. You could also just like write on the papers or write on the herbs like an incantation or your desire. You could even just be like, these are the things about myself I don't like, and then make a bulleted list of things that you want to change or that you don't want to do anymore, or bad habits you want to get rid of. And then you could burn that in a candle. You could burn it in a black candle, or even more appropriately, you could burn that particular paper with the things you want to get rid of in a cauldron, because cauldrons represent transformation, right? We talked about that last lecture. So that would be really effective. And speaking of cauldrons, you could also brew potions, assuming the potions don't include baneful herbs. And be very careful with that. You can't just ingest anything. If you can buy it in the spice section of the store, it's good to drink. If you're picking it outside yourself and you're a beginner and you are not sure exactly what the plants look like and what they do, then you got to be a lot more cautious. But you could brew the potions to drink it. You could brew it to put it in a bottle. You could brew it to bury it, to put it on the ground, to strew it about the ground, whatever you want to do with it, that's fine. But the potion will have different effects depending on what its ingredients are. Okay, so now we'll talk about enchantments. Enchantments are a form of spells where the intent is kind of already decided for you. The intent is really to put your energy into a physical object. I have here that it's considered the lowest form of binding. Some people won't consider it to be. We're going to talk about binding specifically, but the thing about binding is that a lot of people have different definitions, and a lot of those definitions are very narrow. They'll say binding is like tying a rope around somebody so that they, like a metaphysical rope, so that they can't access their own energy. They can't do a certain thing, and that is a form of binding. But if you look at what binding really is on a fundamental level, it goes beyond that. Binding is really the act of doing magic, doing an evocation spell with another person's energy. We'll talk about that in greater detail soon, so don't worry too much about it. Some people don't consider enchantments even to be binding, but I do, because in order for the enchantment to work, whoever is wearing that enchanted object, they have to provide the energy to that object. That object is going to possibly even exhaust them. If you are tired, you're not eating enough, and you have all these things on that are enchanted, that can exhaust you, because it requires some amount of energy in order for that enchanted thing to work. You know, we don't believe in, like, in Wicca, we don't believe in supernatural magic. We don't believe that these objects have any inherent magic in them. I mean, they do have inherent magic in them, but not the kind of magic that causes us to have an actual change of mind or change of perspective. The change of mind, the change of perspective, the commitment basically comes from us, right? So the idea with an enchantment, with an enchanted object, is that you know, the commitment is easier. It's like, because you're wearing something, it's really easy for you to because you're wearing something, it's really easy for you to act in a particular way. So maybe you enchant something like a particular headband to wear when you're working out, and it keeps the sweat off your face, and it makes you feel good, it makes you feel cool, and in addition to that, it helps you run faster, it helps you run farther, it helps you get more into the workout so that you get a better workout, so that you can better reach your goal of losing weight. Just an example, you know. The material and form of the object should match the enchantment. So silver, for instance, that's good for healing or protection because it aligns with water, whereas gold is better for passion or love because it aligns with fire. Likewise, you'll have certain different kinds of symbols, the pentagram or the thorn, a pentacle or the thorn symbol. These are pendants printed for protection specifically. While maybe if you want someone to have like kind of a love charm or a reminder that you love them, you'd get something heart-shaped. And so the idea is, if you're trying to put a love charm into a pentacle, it's just not going to be as effective as if you used a heart-shaped one, because it just doesn't help your mind evoke the same images, right? That's the important thing here, is that all of these things are really exist so that you can experience an altered state of mind. If your mind is altered, then you'll act in a different way. And, you know, people like to dismiss this, saying it's just the placebo effect. And my response to that is, well, who cares? You know, if it's the placebo effect, fine. It doesn't matter. If it works, it's working, right? So if you can put yourself in an altered state of mind and kind of experience the world in a different way, then there you go. Who cares if it's, you know, if it's placebo or if it's something supernatural? You know, that's the whole point of magic, is that it's not supernatural. It's just us finding a way to make real changes in our lives, you know, that is kind of more effective than just, you know, wanting the change and hoping it'll happen. But somehow this just skipped to the end, so that is another example of the Mercury retrograde for you. And you know, actually, I wanted to mention something here that I forgot about, so let me say that now. So I have a little sachet here. So sometimes you'll just put herbs in like a little sachet like this, and this is one type of spell that you can do, and maybe like for calming or something, you could carry it around, and anytime you get freaked out, you can just be like, okay, and then it helps you calm down. Or some people will carry crystals with them, and they'll do the same thing. I wanted to mention that, and I forgot. So actually convenient that we had to go back. Okay, so now the how-to of enchantments. So enchantments work just like spells, except that the goal is already defined. You don't have to sit down and like decide, like, what is my specific goal of this? The goal is to put my energy into this object. Right? So that's all well and good. You still need to have intent and desire, though, but this time the commitment is more flexible. So the idea is that the commitment will follow naturally. You'll run faster because of the thing you enchanted. You'll stay calmer because you have this thing on your skin that reminds you that you want to be calm at all times. You still have to have the intent and the desire, but if the enchanted thing is for another person, the desire is from them and not even from you, and the enchanted thing can help the desire come about. You know, you give them like a nice heart-shaped thing, and they will feel your love, and they'll feel love for you as well, and then that will bring them, you know, confidence and security and all of these things that then have drastic good effects on their life. That's the idea. So the intent is that the object will create this emotional reaction, that the object will create the desire and the commitment. There are many ways to enchant things. All of them involve putting your energy into a physical thing. And like I said, you know, you could use candles to help direct the energy. You could like light a candle and imagine the energy swirling around the candle or going into the candle. Maybe you'll put the thing that you want to enchant under the candle, or maybe you'll put the energy into the candle and then you'll put the thing over the flame of the candle. You know, whatever makes the most sense to you is fine. There's no one right way to do an enchantment. Here's one example, and I'll actually show you this thing. I enchanted this bracelet On the solar eclipse, I have never found a seashell with a hole in it before like this, and I found two on the same day, and one of them actually already broke, so I'm really sad about that, but the other one is still here, and I still feel like the enchantment is working. So I just made this bracelet during the eclipse. I set it out in the sun so I could charge, and then once the eclipse peaked, I went ahead and so I could charge and cleanse it, and then once the eclipse peaked, I cast a circle using bubble casting, real quick and simple, and then I allowed the energy from my heart chakra to fill my circle, just a pink energy, and I chanted, "Shell of sea, being of water, by love of heart be filled with peace and make thy bearer calmer." And you can see here this is not 4 lines or 2 lines, it's not anything specific, but it doesn't even necessarily rhyme, but it does have 7, 8, 7 syllables. It's very poetic. So there's just different examples of the kinds of ways that you can word things and have them still be effective. When the chanting climaxed and I felt like the energy was all around me and was pretty set, then I just allowed it to kind of be absorbed by this shell, and the whole bracelet seemed to kind of glow a little bit. Of course, it's not physically glowing, but it just seemed to be filled with that energy, the love and the peace from my heart chakra. And then once I could kind of see, it's almost like I could see a pink glow in the bracelet, and once that happened, I said, "It is done, so mote it be," and let the circle fade. And that's how you would do a basic enchantment. Okay, so the next one is sigils. Sigils are kind of like a type of enchantment, so they're also technically binding, though again, not everyone agrees with that. We'll talk about binding more in a minute. The type of enchantment that uses symbols to convey meaning, the idea is that you're trapping your energy in a symbol so that you don't have to raise it later. Maybe you're like, about to be arrested by some officer because you're driving 20 over the speed limit and you're nervous and distracted and you couldn't possibly clear your mind if you wanted to. That's a good time to have a sigil, Draw the sigil, unlock the energy, and you'll find that the entire interaction with the cop will go a lot more smoothly, something like that. And so the idea is that, the sigils have the intent in their design. You intend them to be used a certain way, and once you unlock them, they cause the commitment to happen naturally. So you'll be a smoother talker. You'll be more calm in the interaction with the cop. It'll be easier for you to get yourself out of trouble, whatever the sigil is used for. I'm thinking in this case that it's some kind of protection sigil, but you can create a sigil for just about anything. Now the desire has to come from the one using the sigil. So if you drew the sigil yourself, that's easy. You know how you felt when you made the sigil, and that's how you'll have to feel when you use the sigil. So if you're making a sigil that is meant to be used for protection when you get really nervous, you want to actually have yourself feel nervous in ritual. Feel the nervousness that comes from that experience. Visualize what it's like to be in that situation and how nervous it makes you feel. And then get rid of the nervousness, bring in the confidence, and as you feel this energy, you're going to draw the symbol and design something that reminds you of that energy. And then later, when you feel the same nervousness and you draw the sigil, that's all you need to unlock it. If you're developing this for someone else, you might need to have some kind of key phrase or a different symbol or something that will help the person understand how they need to feel in order for the intent, desire, and commitment to all be present. We'll talk about the key a little bit more in just a minute. And I talked about this as well a little bit, but you have to cast circle for sigils, because if you don't, your energy will leak out into the universe, and then you'll feel exhausted, and your sigils might not have as much energy as they should otherwise. You want to get to a state of gnosis or non-thinking, the altered state of mind, where you're not thinking about, is it going to work? What is the science behind this? Don't question all that. When you're doing the actual spell work, that's not the time to be having an existential crisis about whether or not magic is valid. Okay, have that existential crisis with me at any time. I love talking about it. But when you're doing the magical working, put yourself into a state of mind where you are 100% sure that it will work. Okay, that is a requirement for successful magic. Again, don't really even think about it, okay? Don't let yourself to consciously think about it. You should be like in a state where you're not really thinking, and maybe your subconscious mind will form a visualization in your third eye, and that's fine. You know, that is very beneficial. But if it starts to become too distracting for you, then you know, maybe you should consider a form of magic that doesn't rely so heavily on visualization, but more on feelings. And that can be really challenging to explain over like a computer. It's a lot easier to explain in person, but if you feel like you're having issues with visualization, please reach out and I can always help you with that. So you allow your energy to build up in the circle, and then when it feels right, you're going to start to draw. You can use paper, sand, you could draw on the wall, you could draw with chalk, whatever you want to do. You could use pencil, stone, blood, whatever the working is, you should choose the medium for that. So blood's probably not going to be the best thing for protection unless it's menstrual blood. I did a spell recently. I drew it in the sand. I captured the energy of the earth and the water and the sun and the wind and all of that elemental energy at the beach I captured by just drawing it in the sand. And again, the symbol itself can be made up of anything. You could use ancient runes, you could use made-up symbols, you could use made-up shapes, or you could use modern symbols. I did a sigil for money where I just drew a dollar sign and then a plus sign, and then a circle around it. And I was like, I want more money. Money plus, done. And I drew it in the sand with a green crystal, because green is a color that attracts money. So there's an example. So you could, you want to feel your energy as you draw. It's okay to mess up. I messed up a few times where I didn't like it, just scratch it out and do it again. The energy will kind of linger around you, like the emotional energy of the circle will linger around you until you're sure it's ready, and then you send it down into the symbol. Once you draw the symbol, but before you charge it with your energy, you're going to have to determine the key, as we'll talk about in the next slide. And then once you're sure the symbol is done, you send the energy into it. Same thing as enchanting. Sometimes you might use a candle, sometimes you might not, whatever makes the most sense to you, and then it's done. So how to create the key. Okay, this is the trickiest part of sigils. You'll often see, like on these sigil tumblers and stuff like that, they'll give you a sigil, but they have no key with them. So I don't really know how those are supposed to be effective, right? Because unless you actually sit down and charge the sigil yourself and develop a key for the sigil on your own, that symbol is just not going to work for you. It can be a really good source of inspiration going to those tumblers. I personally follow a whole bunch of them. I love them. They're really great. But in terms of actually creating a successful sigil, it's a lot more powerful if you design the symbol yourself. But even if you don't design the symbol yourself, it requires you to charge the symbol. That's the only thing, and to develop this key. The key is a phrase, a word, something that creates an emotion in whoever uses the sigil. So if it's someone that you know really well and it's a protection spell, maybe you'll say to them, the key is the day we met, and you'll give them a symbol. They'll draw the symbol and remember the day they met, and that will give them the emotions that they need for the symbol to work, for the sigil to unlock and the energy to come out. Sigils are really a means to capture energy, and in order to unlock the sigil or to actually make use of it, the emotional reaction of the person using it needs to match the working. So if it's a sigil for protection from other people, like I said, you might give them a positive memory, you might give them something like a joke, something to make them laugh, say it's something that they use when they're scared. You know, if you've ever seen like the first episode of My Little Pony, which I love that show, you know how Pinkie Pie laughs in the face of danger, and that's what gets rid of the scary thing. She's like, well, it's just funny to me because it's not real, it can't hurt me, you know. So maybe laughter is something that you want to use in your spells. You see that theme in Harry Potter too, where like laughing at the bogus, how you get rid of it. So that's a really common theme actually, how laughing in the face of danger, in the face of like being scared of the dark, laughing at the dark can help you to feel more calm. So maybe you want to trigger laughter, maybe you'll put a joke as the key. Whereas if you want to protect something from others, you want to keep prying eyes out, some kind of ward like that, the sigil might make people feel fear or something, and that might unlock the power to keep them away, you know. So I'll give some examples of that here on this slide. You see this main picture here, the sigil in this one is actually the rope. So that's really cool. And the symbol here on the handle is the inscription, and it says, "Death shall come on swift wings to he who disturbs the peace of the king." So the sigil in this case is, if you destroy this rope, then you'll be cursed, right? That's the idea of it. I don't know who actually went ahead and opened this and what effect there was, but That's the idea. So sigils can lose power over time, so it's possible that it wasn't even that potent, but it's possible that it was still really potent. You know, it just depends on how well made the sigil was. Since it's for King Tut, I assume it was probably still potent, and whoever opened this probably had a bad day. But you never know. You'll see on the side over here, the tablet, there's a picture here, and this picture describes some magical working, and then all of the words written beneath it describe the key. So when you read the picture, the idea is if you read this aloud, you're unlocking the power of the image. I don't know specifically what tablet this one is. I didn't actually take the time to decipher it, but it doesn't matter. You'll see in this bottom picture on the left here that there's a lot of different types of symbols that can be used. All of these are well known and have different meanings. There's one called the Seer's Sigil that's here that can help with divination. You'll see this symbol here is something that's very commonly seen on like the kinds of tumblers I follow, where it's like, you know, drawn a certain way. Here's another symbol here that actually has a key with it, and you'll see the key is not even anything poetic. It's just, I will deal with difficult situations easily and successfully. So the key to this sigil is confidence in oneself. Sometimes you'll see sigils carved on physical objects like this, and then the objects themselves are enchanted. And the sigil can help to enchant and unlock the power of the object itself. So the difference between an object that's enchanted to work all the time, which could exhaust you, versus an object that only works when you use it. You know, it could be the difference if it has a sigil on it or not. Okay, so consecrations. This is a really, really common and crucial form of evocation. Consecrations are when you dedicate some object to divine or ritual use only. It is sacred. It will only be used in sacred space. The intent of the working is to create a sacred space, to ensure nothing disturbs the sacredness. That's the idea. You don't really have to worry about desire and commitment in this case because there's no follow-up. The emotional desire, you know, is really just that there will be a sacred space. It's not really very complicated. It's the kind of thing where if you're doing a consecration, your desire is probably already there, right? You already desire a sacred space. That's why you're doing the consecration. So the intent is really the important thing in consecrations. This prevents the dilution of energy in these tools. Once the tool is consecrated, it can go on an altar in ritual. You don't want to put anything that's not consecrated on an altar, and you don't want to bring anything inside the circle that's only used for mundane things. You only want to bring things into circle which are used for sacred acts, because circle is a sacred space, and anything else might have foreign energies attached to it that are not good. You know, when you're in circle, you're invoking energy, so if you accidentally bring some energy in you don't want to invoke, you could be in trouble. You also don't want to dilute the energy that you're building in circle with other foreign influences. So it's important to make sure the things inside your circle are truly cleansed, consecrated, you know, dedicated to sacred use and sacred use only. And like I said, most covens only allow consecrated tools on the altar, myself included. If I ever do like ritual with other people, I say everything has to be consecrated before it can go on the altar. There are different ways to consecrate things though, but I'll give the most common one in Wicca right here. So first you have to cleanse the object. So I have a slide here on how to cleanse. This is important. The note at the bottom here is very important. Not every technique here should be used for every material. Some crystals will fade in sunlight, for instance. Some crystals will have issues if you put them in water. Okay, so you need to be careful when you're selecting which way you want to cleanse things. But there are lots of different ways to cleanse them. You could hold it under a bell, dip it in salt water, draw on it with salt, bury it outside, move it through flames, you know, smudge it, tab it with the athame. And you can see here I've put which elements you're using to cleanse. Most people will cleanse it by every element. They'll do like one of each, or they'll cleanse it by fire and air and earth and water by putting salt water on it and then smudging it over fire and water, that kind of thing. So when you're cleansing it, you can usually just do one of them, but when you're doing the actual consecration, then people will often use a bunch of them at once. Okay, so assuming your object is already cleansed, you left it out on the full moon, on the first night of the full moon, now it's the second night of the full moon, you're casting circle to do your actual ritual, and you want to consecrate your new tools in ritual. Cast circle. The circle is to not really to keep energy in or for protection, because you're not really generating energy out in the circle and then putting it into the object like you do with enchanting. This is a little different. What you need is the sacred space, because the sacred energy of the circle is what you're putting into the tool. You know, so it's like, it is an evocation, because the sacred space comes from you. You are providing the circle. But it doesn't really feel like an evocation because you're not actually having to generate any energy to do this. You know, the divinity within ourselves is enough. You don't have to raise any extra energy by dancing. You could raise extra energy if you want to, but you don't have to. Normally you'll say a prayer over the tool. If you don't believe in divinity, that's not necessary. But most people will be like, please, Goddess, protect this tool for me. Make sure that it's always here, that it's always available for my use. I don't know. I don't come up with very good poetic things on the spot because I'm very analytical, but you would come up with something poetic. Then you'll dedicate the tool to ritual use. I have an example of a consecration in a minute, so I do have some poetic wording I'll show you in a second. Then you want to consecrate it. You take the oil and you start at the top of the tool, rubbing down to the middle, and then you start at the middle and you rub to the other end. Or you start at the other end and rub. So you're rubbing to the middle both times, actually. Start from the top, then you start from the bottom. I'm not really sure where that came from. Okay, so I know where that came from. That's in Doreen Valiant's Natural Magic. I'm not really sure where she got that from, if it's from Gardner or somewhere else. So take it with a grain of salt. Maybe that doesn't feel right to you. Maybe you want to use oil on the whole thing. Maybe you don't like using oil at all. Maybe you want to just use smoke and fire, whatever. I recommend doing it this way only because if you want to go to like a Gardnerian ritual and you haven't consecrated your tools properly, then that can affect the other people there. So if you're going to use tools in a group setting, it's best to kind of do the consecration the same way that everyone else does, just to be sure. But if they're just tools that you only use yourself, feel free to do whatever feels best for you. So here's the example. Say I have a new wand. I bring it into circle with me, but I don't put it on the altar. I'll put it under the altar instead. I'll cast the circle, light the candles, light the incense, everything I have to do to get circle ready, call in the divinities, whatever I have to do to get circle ready. Then I'll take the wand and I'll hold it over the censer, like in the smoke, and I'll say, by fire and air, be cleansed of past energies, that I may see thee as thee are, and we may know each other. So mote it be. And you can see the wording here is about coming to know the energies of the wand, because you're pulling from smoke and fire, and smoke and air and fire are the third eye chakra. They're, you know, the divination, the being able to see how things really are, and the passion to know someone, and all of that is kind of like the, you know, so that's why the wording is the way it is. Next, maybe you'll place it on the pentagram or pentacle that's in your circle. You'll sprinkle the consecrated salt water on it, and then you'll say, by earth and water, be cleansed of past energies, that I may be as I am, and we may work together. So mote it be. So now you're saying, you know, I am going to be myself, that's the earth, but we're also going to compromise and work together, that's the water. So you can see how the wording goes right along with what exactly you're doing. And you have to make sure the salt water is consecrated also. And the incense should already have been consecrated as well. Everything that's on your altar should have been consecrated in a similar way before you use it to consecrate something else. Which is why some people say that you can't have tools unless an actual witch gives them to you. This is where it comes from. The idea that you're not a witch unless someone initiates you is that there's this idea that you can't consecrate something unless you have the athame, or whatever tools you need to consecrate it. Now, I don't agree with that. You know, you could consecrate things with just your spirit itself. You could bubble cast a circle and consecrate the things with just energy workings. So some groups will say you can't do that, and some will say you can. So our group says you can. So finally, you're going to take the oil and rub it from the top to the middle, and then from the bottom to the middle. And as you do this, you'll say, by this oil be consecrated, that they may be used only in love and light, in service of the wise ones, mighty in their being. Blessed be. So now you can see here, this one relies heavily on divinity, because most of the time that you're doing ritual, it involves divinity of some form. But again, if you're doing ritual and you don't believe in the wise ones or divinity or the nameless ones, and you want to kind of substitute things to make it your own, feel free to do that. Most of the time that you're consecrating tools, it's because you're dedicating them to working with the divine energies. But you could instead be consecrating tools to be used in sacred space if you, say, believe that you are God and you're Levian Satanist. Maybe you might still consecrate your tools to be sacred. but maybe the wording here will instead be something more demanding and less about blessings and more about this is my will, this is how it will be used, and it will not be diluted, and you can phrase it however makes the most sense to you. Okay, so the next type of spell is protection. This kind of falls under spell work by itself, but the intent is kind of already decided for you. The intent is safety. I wanted to talk about it separately, specifically because there are different types of shields, and I think it's kind of neat and cool to go over the types of shields and how to visualize them and what they all do. So if you actually download these slides and look at the comment section, I've defined, like, there's a bunch of questions on the next slide, and I've written out, you know, based on how you answer the questions, which kind of shield would work best for you. But there's really kind of 4 types of shields. One is called a porous shield. This allows some energy through, but not others. And it also lets energy out, but maybe not all of the energy. So you could think of like feathers. One of my friends visualizes feathers all around her, and the feathers let some energy through, but other energies get caught by the feathers. The hard shield, that's the typical circle, okay? That's a shield which prevents all flow of energy in or out. It's usually only temporary because it would cut you off from the world around you and you would not be able to feel things. But if you're a really anxious person, really empathic, really easily affected by other people, you might want to consider having a hard shield ready to open at any time. Maybe that's something that works for you. The third kind is filtered. That's a shield which allows all energy through, but only some of it can affect you. Some of it's powerless. So you'll sense the energy, but it won't affect you at all. And the idea behind that is maybe you have, like, you know, you could think about it like a filter, like maybe like a thick, like an actual shield, and as the energy goes through, it gets cleansed so that by the time it gets to you, there's no negative intent. You know, so maybe you can tell if it's a negative energy, but the intent is gone, so it doesn't actually affect your emotions at all. And the final kind of shield, and this one is really uncommon, it's very hard to do. In fact, as far as I know, I invented this technique, but I mean, I'm sure other people have used something similar in the past, but I haven't read anything about this anywhere that I've ever looked. But I call it invocated, and the idea is that the shield transforms the external energy into personal energy before allowing it in. So the energy that's outside of you is not yours, and the energy that's inside of the shield is yours, period. If you want to send energy out, you have to transform it into something else. And for me, I visualize my shield as a bunch of tangential lines, like tangential, like so that it forms a circle, but the lines like can go out and circle around things. And then they transform themselves, kind of unwinding back towards me. The energy then becomes my energy, so by the time I feel it, it's my own. And this can be really exhausting and hard to maintain and tricky, and the reason I use a shield this complicated is very complex. I'm not going to go into it here. The members of the coven kind of understand why I do this. But that kind of shield can be very effective at allowing you to interact with other energies while still not allowing anything in or out that you don't want, you know. So it just depends on what kind of shield works best for you. Now, wards are shields that you anchor to a place. And the way that you would do that is you would cast the shield around you, or cast the circle, and then you would kind of lock it in. And I haven't really found a good way to explain what that locking it in is. There's a lot of different techniques and visualization techniques you can use. Some people will say that you should like have something else in the room generate the energy. A lot of different techniques, and I don't want to get too in depth here because, you know, this is already going to be a long lecture, so maybe we'll do a separate lecture series specifically on protection later on. So the how-to, you have to align your chakras. That's really important to protection magic in general, and the reason for that is just because if you're not healthy, then it's really easy to be affected by energy, so you have to be in a healthy frame of mind to be able to protect yourself, and that's why you need to align your chakras. Next, you'll allow your energy to expand and fill the space around you, so bubble casting. You'll select some kind of visualization technique which meshes with the way the shield is meant to work. So like I mentioned, the feathers or the tangential lines, or you could imagine just a light, something like that. And here are the 2 questions. So if you look at this slide, you know, outside of this presentation, and you see the little comment section at the bottom of the slide, which you see not in this presentation mode, but if you're just going through the presentation kind of in edit mode. you'll see that the way you answer these questions will determine which shield is best for you. So are you more comfortable existing in your own space than sharing space with others? And are you more comfortable sensing everything that goes on around you, even if it is not relevant? And depending on how you answer these questions, different kinds of shields would work better for you. Then you'll take a few moments to ground and center each morning, for instance, and then you'll send your energy out and visualize the shield throughout the day. So most people wake up, visualize their shield, and off they go. Some people, like me, visualize their shield 24/7, something I'm always aware of, even in my sleep. Usually there's not a need for that. A lot of people are not able to have the shield up in their sleep, so they might create something like a sigil, which will protect them while they're sleeping. If they're doing something like astral travel or something like that, they'll have a sigil that they can draw over their bed, or maybe they'll line it out with like flower petals or something, and then they'll go ahead and actually go to sleep and not worry that they're going to be protected because they have that circle already around them. They have the shield up. Okay, so now it's time to talk about binding. And this is going to use up most of the rest of our time, but it's the second to last. I'll give the last example is on cursing, which I don't necessarily agree with, but I will give you the information you need and let you decide for yourselves. Binding, like I said, is using another's energy to do magic. It is not invoking. You are not bringing the energy into you, and you should not. I cannot stress this enough. If you bring other people's energy into you and you don't filter it, it will affect you. It can affect you in a million different ways, sometimes unpredictably, and it can change you. And, a lot of people watch movies and they see like, he might get smited by lightning or hit by a fireball. Magic is in the movies, magic is dangerous because something bad will physically happen to you. In real life, magic is dangerous because you will lose yourself. You will be hurt by the working. Your mental health will suffer. You could be depressed. Okay, in real life, you're not getting dragged into a room. I guess this could happen. I can think of at least a few scientific frameworks in which this is possible. But you're not usually being dragged around. You're not walking into a room and the lights are flickering and stuff. Most of the time, when there's some kind of possession or some kind of foul play at work, it's you. It's like, someone's not coming to rip your baby's head off. You will kill your baby yourself. That is the danger here. The most common symptom or the most common side effect of like working with demons is like madness and suicide. And we'll talk about this more when we get to we're going to talk about each one of these in turn. But the dangers here are very real. And if you're not more scared of losing yourself or becoming emotionally damaged by magic than you are of fireballs and what you see in the movies, then you need to get your head out of Hollywood, because this is real life and you could really mess things up if you're not careful. I don't want anybody here messing with the 4th and 5th level of this. If you're watching these lecture series, then you're probably not ready. Now, some people will have experiences with Fae and spirits, and that's fine, okay? Be very careful. I can't stress it enough. I will talk about each one of these, how to do this, not in great detail because we don't have enough time. And honestly, this kind of magic is advanced. It's more kind of 2nd degree level magic. Not something that you normally want people who are not even initiated into the craft doing. But I want you to understand what it is and how it works. Now, we've already talked about number 1, binding yourself to a thing. Okay, binding yourself to a thing. Why is that binding? How does that involve using another person's energy? It involves using another person's energy because you have to create an evocation in another person. If the enchanting and the sigils are just for yourself, it's not binding. But if you're creating an enchantment or a sigil for someone else, which is more common, then you kind of are indirectly binding, right? You're not actually using their energy, but you are requiring that they make use of their own evoked energy in order for it to be effective. So your actual magic has to be able to evoke emotions in them. And that's why I consider it to be the first lowest type of binding, even though many people wouldn't consider it. Many people don't even define binding this way. Binding has become synonymous with cursing. And the third type you'll see here is cursing. Affecting another person's energy, binding another's energy from themselves. Okay, charming, cursing, confusing, that is a form of binding, but there's lots of different kinds of binding. And if you think about, how people usually use the term binding, then this definition I think will start to make more and more sense. And like I said, I like to be as inclusive as possible. So any way that people use the term binding, I want it to be here in this presentation, be in your minds. I want you to really understand magic from a comprehensive standpoint and not just the stereotypical way that people do things. Okay, so this is the general how-to, and then we're going to modify this at each level. I think I have binding is dangerous written in bold letters on just about every single one of these slides, so I really can't stress that enough, and I will continue to stress it just to make sure. The first steps are just like any spell. You're going to ground and center, and you're going to cast circle. Circle might not be necessary for types 1 to 3, depending on the working. I mean, for type 1, it pretty much is, because you're doing enchanting, sigils, cleansing spaces, as I talked about. The circle and cleansing spaces is like literally the entire working. The enchanting and sigils, you want to keep your energy in so you don't get exhausted. But you might not necessarily need a circle for those 3. It's highly recommended. When you're doing types 4 and 5, you absolutely need a circle, and I'll talk about why. It's easily to accidentally invoke the energy if you lose focus or you're disturbed. Okay, so you think the door's locked, you know the windows are closed, you think you're totally safe, and then a bird flies into your window and scares you, and you lose focus, and suddenly you just invoked the energy that could literally kill you. You know, or change you in some way, change your personality, so that people in your life don't even recognize you. Okay, dangerous. And again, if that doesn't frighten you, if losing everyone you love because you suddenly have a change in personality doesn't frighten you, then you've obviously not had a lot of experience with mental illness, and you should be more scared of that, I'd say, than you already are. Once the energy is let in, it can have all sorts of unknown effects on one's subconscious. You might not even know it's affecting you. You might not even know. And it can really change your life, and sometimes in less than positive ways. I mean, it could change in positive ways, but depending on the energy, but usually it doesn't. Usually it's almost always a negative change because it's unintentional. You know, unintentional changes, they come as a surprise, they shake us to the core. It happens all the time. Something unexpected happens, and you know, you're shaken to the core, and you have to really find your strength and find your find out what is important to you. So really can't stress it enough. The rest of the steps depend on the type of binding, so we're going to talk about each one separately, and we've already covered number 1 by talking about enchanting, protection, and the last one, I forget what it is. Okay, so type number 2, binding another's energy to a thing. So making a puppet, if you want to make a placeholder, like say you're doing tarot, and you want to have their energy physically with you, then that requires you to bind their energy. You have to reach out, grab some of their energy, and bring it back to you. Usually, like I said, you don't invoke it. You don't even necessarily bring it into your circle. It just depends on the kind of energy. If it's a person that you know and they're present and you trust them, then they join the circle. It's easy. So doing a tarot card reading for someone in person, easy. Most of the time people will cleanse someone they don't know. They'll put sage all around them, and they'll clarify their intention before they let them in the circle at all, right? And this is how you can do tarot card workings for people you've never met over the internet. You just have to bind some of their energy. It usually requires you to know what their aura is, and their aura isn't some supernatural thing either. Like, they have a collection of cells, which are themselves a collection of particles, which are themselves a collection of fundamental quantum energy. And this energy is vibrating in a certain way. And the reason why everyone has a unique aura is because everyone is different. You know, no two people are identical. Even identical twins aren't identical. And sometimes identical twins have completely different aura colors and completely different personalities, and that's fine. Sometimes they're born under different rising signs, and they're really different people, you know. So no two people are exactly the same, and that's why knowing the aura really helps. So if you can visualize their energy as a specific color, that's what most people mean when they say my aura color is this or that. It's not like there's a real color. Some authors write about it like they can see it. You can't see it. It's not electromagnetic energy. It's not. You couldn't see it if you wanted to because it's not light. It doesn't really exist like that. It's just a vibration. It's just a sense that you can pick up on. And it's not supernatural either. You know, we're all fundamentally connected by the fact that we are all the same type of energy. And the way that energy vibrates determines what particle it is. And what particles make up a molecule determine what molecule it is. And what molecules make you up determine, you know, what... So it all fundamentally breaks down to the same thing. And this is not a lecture on metaphysics, so I won't go too deep down the rabbit hole. But I just want to say that, it's just something that you can feel. It's vibes. That's it. And you can associate a color with it. And sometimes you can even see the color in your mind's eye. And that's something that I did, for example, from a young age, because I couldn't make sense of what was happening otherwise. So I would just see the color and boom. So when someone's like, oh, your aura color is blue, everyone's always like, what does that mean? Nothing. It's you. Your energy is blue. It doesn't mean anything specific. It's not like I could tell you something about you because of the color of your aura. I mean, maybe I could. If your aura is blue, you're probably more likely to go with the flow, but not because your aura is blue. Your aura is blue because you're more likely to go with the flow. It's the other way around, okay? A lot of people kind of get that mixed up. In order to do this, you have to be able to put yourself completely aside, okay? If you don't put yourself completely aside, you're not going to really be feeling their true energy. You're only going to be feeling kind of like an echo of their energy, what their energy means to you. So in order to be able to do this kind of magic, you have to know yourself really well, or you have to be able to put yourself into a state of non-thinking, or both. Some people will visualize like magnets pulling it out. Some people visualize it as a stream of energy or some kind of connector. Whatever kind of visualization technique you want to use, some people will just feel the movement of energy, and that's fine too. When the energy is moving, you can really feel it. You might get goosebumps, you'll tense up a little bit, and you will literally feel the energy moving around you. If you don't feel the energy moving, then you're probably not in the right state of mind. Something is not working, something is not being effective. You should have a physical feeling, a tingly sensation in your muscles themselves. Okay, that is how you know that the magic is working. So once you get their energy swirling around you, you'll direct it into an object like a doll, just like you would with enchanting. You could put it in a mirror. That's a way to trap someone. You could put it into a candle, and then every time you light the candle, they're there with you. And this doesn't have to be for cursing. So for instance, if I bind someone's energy to a candle, and then they're going to an important interview, I could light the candle, and then I could focus myself and lend energy to them, so that when they're in the interview, they feel my focus, and it helps them do a better job. So this is why I say binding is not necessarily cursing, and it's not necessarily black magic. Just because you're working with another person's energy doesn't mean you're violating some ethical law, especially not if you ask for permission. Most of the time when you're doing really simple stuff like getting someone's energy so you could do a tarot card reading, they're not even going to know that you're pulling the energy from them, so it's not that important. But it is always nice for you to let someone know, hey, I'm borrowing some of your energy so I could do this or that, It's just like a courtesy thing, because they can be exhausted by your working if you're using their energy. So it's kind of a courtesy thing to let them know that you're going to use it. So the third type, binding another's energy from themselves. This is binding in the traditional sense. This is how everyone uses the term binding. It's usually a form of cursing. Most of the time you want to prevent them from being able to do something. So you're saying this person's not going to be able to evoke this energy at all. So if they want to make this change in the world, too bad. You want to cast the circle the same way. This time you want to make sure that the energy that you're pulling towards you is not really coming into the circle. Okay, so you don't want their energy to come inside because you don't want to accidentally invoke their energy. In the previous one, it's a little less important because you're not doing anything diabolical, but when you're doing this type of magic, it is kind of diabolical. So you want to make sure, because their subconscious mind could reject what you're doing and become very hostile, that their energy is not coming into you, and that's why their energy comes to the outside of the circle, while your energy builds inside the circle. And you could think about it like energy inside is going clockwise, or counterclockwise, or whatever makes sense to you, and the energy outside is going the other way, or they could go the same way, whatever makes sense. You're going to visualize their energy swirling about outside and your energy swirling about inside. Once you raise the energy that you want them to have, you're going to kind of allow the circle to drop while you send your energy into theirs and back into them. So it's like it's swirling, it's swirling, it's swirling, and then suddenly it all combines together and flies out back over to them, going into their mind, going into their subconscious, and affecting their every perception, their every action. The commitment. You're trying to basically, you're putting your intent and your desire into them so that they have a specific type of commitment. They act in a specific type of way. This is not dangerous, this part of it, because the energy your energy is going out and breaking the circle as it goes, so there's no chance of you invoking their energy at that point because everything is moving away from you. You're not bringing anything in. So it's very important that when your circle breaks, you're pushing the energy out, and that's it. So don't break the circle unless you're fully focused and you're fully ready to send the energy out. And that's the idea of this one. Oh, come on, go to the next slide. There we go. Okay, those are the first 3 kinds of binding. I feel very comfortable with you guys doing those things. You'll find that in most cases, you'll find that binding type number 3 is usually not necessary. There's usually a much nicer way to resolve things that don't involve causing someone to have a physical change in their subconscious mind. And you could be doing it for beneficial purposes, like love spells or something, but it could have unknown consequences. When you're working with another person's energy, you don't really know. Unless you work with their energy all the time, you don't really have any way of knowing exactly what the outcome of you giving them your energy is going to be. But that's why you want to kind of pull their energy towards you, then change it in a specific way and send it back. And the idea is that if you do it that way, you can control a little bit better exactly how it affects them. It still can be unpredictable, and you'll usually find there's another way of doing it that doesn't involve anything in the ethical gray area. Again, in our coven, we don't decide what is and isn't right. We allow people in our group who do curses and who do think it's okay to bind other people. As long as you're not doing it to other people of the coven, I don't care. That's for you to decide. Most covens, no. If you're cursing people and you're doing black magic, you're not allowed in. So remember that, okay? Because if you're doing this kind of stuff and you're skilled in these kinds of things, you might be closing doors in the pagan community. Now, binding number 4. Okay, binding Fae, demons, or spirits. On this first slide, we're going to define what these things are. First of all, circle is mandatory for this. Absolutely mandatory. You do not want to bring this energy into yourself almost ever. If you're invoking the Fae, that is something that you do commonly do, but that is actually less dangerous, and we'll talk about that with invocation magic. Invoking the Fae means that you are allowing elemental energy into you so that you can use the aspects of the elements that you already possess. Like we talked about in the previous lecture, that would mean that you're using, the ones under the self category. So if it's earth, you're using strength and abundance, and etc. So invoking the Fae you can do, but invoking demons and spirits you don't usually want to do. When you evoke them, in order to evoke any of these things, you have to deal with the fact that they have consciousness. The idea is this. These beings exist on our plane of existence in different realms, and they make up our plane of existence. Consciousness pervades all aspects of existence because at the most fundamental level, we are all one thing. We are all the same energy. And therefore, if we had consciousness and these other things didn't, then where would the consciousness we have comes from? So what is unique about us that we have consciousness? Well, I would say nothing. Everything has consciousness. It's just not concentrated. It's not a concentrated life form like we are. It's more. It's a different kind of consciousness. It's a different kind of awareness. Okay, but it's still a consciousness nonetheless. It's just not embodied like we are. Demons are the consciousness of chaos energy. The Fae are the consciousness of the elements, and spirits are the consciousness of death energy. Okay, so the Fae are the consciousness of life energy, which are the elements, which the elements are what make up life energy, like we talked about in the previous lecture. And spirits are the consciousness of death energy, and that's why spirit is kind of the flip side of the elements. But the element spirit kind of falls in the middle. Spirit is what links the Fae and the spirits together, So, a little tricky. If you have any questions on that, let me know. Evoking any of these energies requires you to bind a consciousness to this plane of existence, period. If you're evoking these energies, you run into consciousness, you have to be binding. It's that simple. The consciousness is not embodied. There's less of a distinction between different beings. So you have to be very careful and very particular about what you're evoking. If you're trying to contact a certain spirit, but you accidentally contact a demon, that can have very severe consequences, right? You could rely on advice from somebody who doesn't have your best interests at heart. So when you're doing these kinds of evocations, you have to be very specific. You have to be very careful. And you have to be able to recognize whether or not someone is who they say they are. Even some spirits might not mean well. You might think that you're evoking the spirit of your dead grandfather, and it could be the spirit of, I don't know, some evil dictator that hates you and wants to see you suffer for some reason. I don't know. So you have to be really careful that you know what you're doing, and that's why I really can't stress enough that this is not beginner magic. This is kind of second-degree magic. This is more of like a snapshot of what's to come, and I really don't think anyone who's taking these kinds of lectures should just dabble in this. This is like, understand this, know how it works. When you get more comfortable with spell work in general and the lower forms of binding, then you can start, working with this. Now, in the homework, I will give you things to help you read about these things. I mean, I thought really hard about even including this in the lectures, but I'd rather you be well informed with the dangers and the precautions you need to take than that you look this stuff up yourself and make mistakes. So I'm telling it to you against my better judgment, because I really do trust you guys and think that, if you're watching these videos, you'll take stock of where you are and not risk hurting yourself in any way. That being said, let's define the terms and talk about summoning the different types of beings. Okay, so summoning, that is purposefully bringing a conscious being into physical form. Though it's not embodied, it's physical. So you could see it with your third eye. You can sense it in a very physical, real way. Maybe it makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Maybe it makes the air around you cold. It is physical, even though it's not embodied. Okay? On this plane of existence where we live, in the real physical world. You're bringing it here and making it concentrated enough that you can sense it, work with it, and commune with it and have some understanding of it and not invoke it. Okay, definitely not invoke it, but understand it, okay, and use it, or even command it to do a certain thing. You can command demons, you can command Fae. It's usually best to make requests of Fae instead of commanding them, because they're usually really nice, and working with them is better than commanding them, but demons are almost never nice. If you want something from a demon, you've got to be commanding. And there's a chapter of one of Gardner's books that will demonstrate and give a real example of what it would be like to summon a demon. Manifesting is unknowingly giving a conscious being physical form. And this is how every horror movie ever happens. Recently, I just watched the horror movie Annabelle, and that's literally what's happening. So in the beginning, you see like the sewing machine turns on its own. The light switch flickers. Doors open and close. Okay, stuff like that. That's normal. That's like there's a disturbance of energy causing the flow of things to be a little disrupted. It's not a physical thing really, but it is physical. It's not embodied, but it is a physical thing that's able to interact physically on some level. Now, if you manifest that energy, it will become more and more physical, though still not embodied, but it will become more and more physical until it does have a chance of actually really affecting things around you. And this is what you see in the movies, like in Annabelle. Nothing bad started happening until they got scared. Okay, they get scared. Subconsciously, what that means is that they are manifesting this energy. They are very aware of the energy. They are giving it power by having desire. The main trigger for this is emotions, fear, sometimes love if it comes to spirits or Fae. That is how you give things physical form. Often, most of the time, it's fear. And this can happen to people, especially who don't believe in ghosts. Do you not believe in ghosts, even subconsciously? You would look me in the eye and you tell me that when you're alone in the dark, you're not nervous. You hear something, you're not nervous. Okay? If you can swear to that and you know yourself so well, you are sure that that's not the case, fine, I believe you. And you're probably not at risk. The real danger from ghosts and demons and all of these things, and even the Fae, comes from the fact that people who may not believe in it or may not be self-aware don't realize the power that they give these things. Things don't have power over you, a physical embodied being, unless you give it to them. That is a really important concept. So people who don't believe in ghosts may be even more susceptible than the people who do. Oftentimes they think they're safe. Oh, well, I don't believe in ghosts. You look me in the eye and you tell me you never get scared of the dark. Go on. I've never met a single person who truly subconsciously doesn't believe in ghosts. I have maybe one friend, maybe, who doesn't. And he is very self-aware. Interesting how that works. See? Okay, so communing, that's the third one here. Communing is sensing and experiencing the energy of another conscious being without actually invoking it. It's like just picking up on the vibes. The example I give is, so one time I was doing an exorcism and there was a ghost, and I wanted to first, find out, is this a friendly ghost? Is this ghost here to tell this person something? I don't want to just banish a ghost, right? Like, I don't know what this ghost is here for, okay? But it's making them uncomfortable, so I have to do something. So I go in there, they're all like talking loud, having a party. It was a Friday night in college, I start whispering, and they're just like whispering like this. It gets a little louder, but not loud enough for people to hear me. But suddenly everyone stops and they look at me and they're like, what the fuck are you doing? It made people like goosebumps. It made people so nervous because the energy, they could sense it when I started to manifest it a little bit. I wasn't even really manifesting it. I wasn't summoning it, okay? I'm just communing with it. I'm just seeing how it feels in a very abstract sense. Not bringing it into my mind, but just sensing it. And when you do that, you can have a better understanding of what it's there for. So the second I started doing that, they all get uncomfortable, and I'm like, okay, so you don't recognize this energy? Absolutely not. This feels terrible. Great. Banish the ghost, cleanse the house, done. Okay? Nothing else required. If the ghost energy felt familiar, then I would summon the ghost and actually talk to the ghost or allow the ghost to talk through me, so that we could see if the ghost had something important to say. Okay? And then we could banish and cleanse the house if the ghost is, most of the time that happens, the ghost is a friendly ghost, and once they've had their say, they go away. So most people commune with things automatically, especially mediums. They are communing all the time. That's why spirits are attracted to them, because they're so easy to commune, mediums are so easy to commune with. But again, it's not invoking. You're not letting their energy into you at all. It's just kind of a more abstract way of sensing them. It's like empathy. It's like just because you can understand, it's more like sympathy. It's like just because you can understand what someone is going through doesn't mean you've experienced it or that you can really see it from their perspective. It's just kind of like a way of kind of getting a sense of how they feel. So those are the main terms. The other term that's in the notes here, conjuring, is actually not a magical term. That's like illusion. So it's like conjuring is like fake magic. So it's not a real magical term. Okay, so now that we've talked about what those terms mean, we're going to talk about actually summoning, not because you never want to manifest things. Manifesting is always an accident. Manifesting is how horror movies happen. And there are horror movies that are very accurate. If you're watching, for example, The Babadook, that is how hauntings happen. That is real life haunting right there. And I won't spoil the movie because you should watch it if you haven't seen it. So the side effects of demon bindings gone wrong. If the demon gets invoked at all, you can experience madness, delusions, a breakdown of what you can perceive of as real, odd behaviors and new habits. This would be the prime example of like the skinwalkers. You go out into the woods and you get infected by a demon and you come back a different person. Your personality, your voice, your mode of speech changes. Altered physical characteristics. You might carve symbols on yourself. You might get new tattoos, things that help the demon inside of you feel more comfortable. You might have periods of memory loss and fainting, and at the worst case, you'll have things like seizures or death. The most common way that death can manifest is by suicide. The most common thing that happens when demons infect people is that they kill themselves. And that's kind of why I liked Annabelle, because, in the last scene in Annabelle, there's like crayon drawings all over the wall that say your soul. So if this was like real life, there wouldn't be some freaky looking alien demon thing. It would just be like she had a period of memory loss and woke up in that room and she wrote the things on the wall herself, right? But she doesn't remember doing it. And then the window opens like, kill yourself, that is exactly the kind of thing that happens when a demon infects you. Like, you will kill yourself, you will kill your dog, you will kill, you'll go crazy, you'll lose your mind. This is exactly what madness is. The consciousness of chaos. It is dangerous. Demons should never be invoked in Wicca. If you're working with chaos magic, it's a different story. I'm just starting to dabble in that now. As a second-degree high priestess who's been practicing magic for like 20 years, the first 13 of which, in 13 years of intuitive magic, 7 years of formal training, and even now I am just starting to dabble, and I am still approaching things extremely carefully. It is dangerous. Normally what you'll do is you'll put the demons in a separate triangle-shaped circle that they can't escape. So if you look at the picture here on the slide, you see how there's a triangle up here at the top that has like the words, the names of God, like tetragrammaton. These are very sacred, powerful names. And then you have a circle trapped by a triangle. You would summon the demon in there, and then you are inside of this other circle. A second circle, here you can see it's very traditional circle, 3 rows. It has holy symbols, things that demons don't like. Demons don't like order. They are chaos. They hate order. Okay, so if you have like an ordered, rune system protecting you, they won't be able to get in. They hate it. It's like in science how sometimes, things are repelled, like oils repel water. Same thing, okay? It can't get in. Demons like blood. They like living sacrifices. Could be animals, could be babies. I'm not even joking. Like, when people are working with demons, they're working with crazy shit. They like virgin skin paper. That's often like goat skin paper that has never been used for anything and is made in a particular way. They like disorder. If you have a lot of disorder in your life, that can even attract demons to you. And they like certain kinds of incense. They like myrrh and frankincense, and just like deities, they're like lesser deities almost. You could think about demons like that. Deities are, they're the higher level of that. They are like an abstraction above demons and fae and spirits. Demons are normally summoned to answer tough questions or to curse people. You would command them. You would say, I command you answer this question. I command you curse this person. You would summon them when you're trying to do magic that is beyond the scope of human ability. You need chaos itself at your fingertips to make this spell successful. Very rarely do you ever need to summon a demon. I thought about summoning Thanatos when I was having really horrific nightmares. I did everything. I did spells to cleanse my home. I did spells to cleanse my space. The nightmares were clearly coming from me, and I couldn't figure out why that would be happening. So I almost summoned Thanatos, the dream demon, to actually just ask him, why is this happening? And finally the dreams wound up going on their own, so I didn't have to resort to that, thankfully, because you never want to work with demons. If you don't have to work with demons, don't work with demons. The only reason I'm getting into chaos magic now is because I have felt the call. I have felt the call of chaos. And if I don't answer it, I'm gonna manifest it. I'm gonna manifest it if I don't explore it. And that's the danger in that kind of thing. So, just be careful if you have to do anything that involves this kind of magic. Okay, so less dangerous, but still dangerous, working with the Fae. We have some people in our coven who've had some bad experiences with the Fae, so you can feel free to ask them about it. But the kinds of things that you get when bindings go wrong here, or if you actually invoke or you piss off some fairy and they manage to get into your life, unforeseen hardship, unluckiness, that's the most common. You have fatigue, exhaustion, malnutrition. You could be eating plenty of food and somehow still you're not getting the nutrients, because fairies can actually steal the nutrients out of the food. Or affect your digestive system, so it can't work as efficiently. You can experience distance from or lack of familiarity with loved ones. If the fairies are inside of you and inside of your energy, then it'll be harder for you to feel like you're yourself. And other people will perceive that as well, creating distance. They can cause hallucinations, delusions of grandeur. That's really common. People who are like, they meet a fairy and all of a sudden they're just like, I am the greatest being to ever live. Bow to me. So like that kind of stuff. And at the worst case, they can cause illness or injury. Often the illness is just the result of the fatigue and malnutrition. And the injury is not usually anything severe. It's things like tripping or stubbing toes. Fairies are not out to like kill you. They're not like demons, okay? They can be very mean. But if you don't offend them and you're very nice to them and you make make nice requests. They're always trying to make a deal. You always have to make a deal with fairies, but you have to be careful because they're always going to try to make a deal that's better for them than it is for you, and they're very tricky. So be careful what you wish for. If your wish is, I wish I could be rich, that's a bad wish because the fairy's going to be like, haha, okay, and then they'll just like make you lose your job and make you go through all this hardship, and then finally you'll like find a new job that pays better. You know, is that really what you wanted? Did you want to go through all that hardship, or did you want to be like, I want a promotion at this specific job, or I don't want to lose my job, but I wish that another job would come along that I like better. You know, so there's better ways to phrase your wishes that will enable you to be sure that, you know, nothing bad is going to happen. Now, most of the time you have to give something to the fairies that you don't get back. That will involve usually burying it. Something like that. So there's another member of our coven who wished to be a genie, what's called jinn. So he can now grant wishes for other people, but every time he does, they have to give him a gift for the fairies. If he doesn't give the gift to the fairies and he breaks the deal, that will offend them. Okay, binding one without permission, that offends them too. You offend a fairy, they're going to try to infect you, they're going to get into your life, and they're going to wreak havoc. Now, if you've got a good circle and you're protected, usually they can't do that. But if they sense that you're fully protected and you're not vulnerable, they'll often not even make a deal with you at all. You have to offer something that's, you know, really valuable to them because they're going to be worried that you're going to try to pull a fast one on them and not give them what you offered. So if you do that, they might go after a loved one who's less well protected, right? So you got to be careful. You never know what the fairies are going to do. They're conscious beings, you know, they're conscious beings that just exist differently than we do. Deals are usually for things like wishes, magical feats, again, that are too tough for human magic alone. If you meet somebody who's of the Fae, quote unquote, what it means is that they have fairy blood in them, so they can usually perform these magical feats themselves, which is really cool. They don't have to bind the Fae in order to use fairy energy, in order to evoke Fae magic, because they are Fae. Very powerful evokers, extremely so. Oftentimes very intuitively so they often don't have a lot of control over what they're doing. And the hard part is for them is learning how to control their evocations, not learning how to have successful evocations. But the kind of magic is like big stuff, like stuff that might be too hard for a human to do alone. I can't give any specific examples off the top of my head. I should have thought of one, but there's lots of things. Fairies like milk, honey, bread. They like natural gardens. They, you know, leave a part of your garden completely natural, just for fairies. Anything that attracts butterflies and hummingbirds and other life beings will also attract fairies. You want to attract the fairies, make them happy. You never want to just like throw their offerings out like you might for like something else. You want to put them in a little basket, you know, nice and pretty. Maybe get like a little miniature teacup set, have like a little fairy circle with rocks, you know. Fairies like beautiful, natural, happy life scenes. And the happier you make the fairies, the more likely they are to work with you and to not try to pull a fast one. So that's the key with fairies, is to treat them with respect, and they'll respect you. And finally, how to, number 4, spirits. So the side effects of spirit bindings gone wrong can be pretty intense, or not as intense. It just depends on the spirit that you're binding. So you could have violent outbursts, intensified emotions, particularly like depression, feeling like you should kill yourself, especially if you're like, I should kill myself, but I don't know why. That can definitely come from having a spirit binding gone wrong or having some spirit inside of you. You'll have, again, the change of personality, voice, or mannerisms. You might experience hysteria or impulsive and self-harming behavior, like acting for the moment and not even thinking about what's going to happen in the future. And the reason is because spirits are just like so averse. They're just like, they love life so much that they'll just be like, yeah, let's jump off a cliff. That sounds great. Life, living life to its fullest. Yeah. So that's the kind of thing that a spirit is like super about, that a human would be like, I don't really want to die today. Another common side effect of spirit possessions are speaking in tongues, languages that you don't actually understand or speak, but suddenly, all of a sudden, you have that knowledge. A heightened ability to do divination. That's one of the benefits, actually, of trying to do a spirit binding. So maybe that shouldn't even be in the gone wrong category, but, you know, it can get to a point where you can't break yourself out of that state of mind. You're not even able to live your mundane life because everything that's going on around you is, like, so intense. It can cause increased strength or endurance in physical tasks, which is usually, again, a good thing, but that can exhaust you. You know, that can actually hurt you in the long run as well. So some of the really bad things it can cause: memory loss, fainting, seizures. That's like the stereotypical evil spirit exorcism kind of horror movie. And it can also cause a loss of appetite, nausea, or stomach pains as well. It can just make you feel exhausted. It can take nutrients out of you again, stuff like that. Circle should always be used again. Evoking spirit energy means actually summoning the consciousness of a deceased being to you. So how does that fit into the idea of reincarnation? You know, people could have been reborn, so they might not actually still be dead. Can you still summon their spirit? Yes, but if they are incarnated, they might know that you're doing it, because some amount of the human consciousness is always on higher planes of existence. The human soul is greater than the four-dimensional world we live in, 4 dimensions being space and time. So if a person is embodied and alive, they might know that you're pulling on the energy of their past life. They might not. Depends how sensitive they are and how in tune they are with their past lives. But if you're pulling on the energy of someone who's actually just dead right now and they haven't reincarnated, then that's often even easier. And this is why people say it's kind of rude to bind spirits, because you don't know. It's better to commune with them first and find out if they're really dead or not. Like calling up a spirit out of the blue, like say Albert Einstein, just because you want to talk to him, might not be a good idea, because who really knows if that person is alive or not. Now, I will say that I did bind the spirit of Gerald Gardner. I bound his spirit once because I had to ask him about initiation. I was trying to join every kind of coven under the sun. I wanted to join a Gardnerian coven. I wanted to join this coven, that coven. And I felt like I wasn't a real witch because I wasn't in a coven, and it really bothered me. So, I reached out to him and I just said, what is initiation? Why does this concept exist, really? And I remember, it was so cool the way I did. I used mugwort. I sat in a dead creek and I channeled the energy of the dead, that way, and I did it in the season of death as well. And then when he came, he constantly kept saying, everything is magic, everything is magic. He kept saying over and over again, and I just was like, it was so amazing feeling the energy of a spirit so great. And I'm actually really not sure that Gerald Gardner is even going to reincarnate. He might have actually broken out of the cycle. I'm not positive on that, but I got that sense when I was talking to him, and talking in quotes, because it's not really talking, It's not like he's really physically there. It's just kind of like vibes, senses. And so I asked him, I said, what about initiation? And all he said is, initiation is for mortals. It's like, what does that mean? So I'm trying to, I took a long time to kind of make sense of that, but what I came to understand is initiation is something which makes people feel a specific way. You feel more qualified when you've done an initiation into something, into a group, into this or that. It's more official. It's harder to leave something after you've done the initiation. It's a form of changing oneself so that you're really committed, and whatever you're committing to really becomes a part of you. And that's when I learned the true nature of initiation, and I became less worried about the fact that I hadn't actually initiated into witchcraft and formally through a coven. I mean, I did do a self-initiation when I became a high priestess. And it did. From that experience, I really learned what it meant to do an initiation, and that way when I did the initiation for myself, it really did have the same effect that an initiation into a coven would have. And it's the kind of thing where if you're doing a self-initiation, you have to be really, this is kind of like a side note, but you have to be really confident that you know yourself. Like, I didn't feel ready to initiate, but I knew that I was deep down. And when I did the initiation, I really felt that energy, the change in myself, the transformation when I became a high priestess. It was like, and I had a few moments of self-doubt even after the initiation. That's normal. But it's one of those things that it's just, and so I will do a whole talk about self-initiation in some of the upcoming lectures, and I'll pull a lot from that experience that I had by summoning Gerald Gardner's spirit, because The purpose of this course is really to give people the means to become witches without the need to depend on a system which could just discriminate against them. You know, people don't like me. They don't like my energy. They don't like this or that. I don't fit in well. You know, I'm very like, you know, what's the word, bold, I guess. Like, you know, I told this one high priestess, I was like, well, you're very judgmental. She didn't like that. She didn't like being criticized. People don't like being criticized. But, you know, she's been a high priestess for so long that no one's ever criticized her for the past 35 years. She didn't take a liking to that, and I'm not going to be able to join that coven. So it's one of those things where it's like, you know, if you don't really fit in to a certain group, then what are you supposed to do? Just never become a witch? That doesn't make sense to me at all. And that's why I wanted to form this coven, because it's so important that people who don't really fit in anywhere else can fit in here and feel comfortable. And that's why our coven does recognize self-initiations and initiations from other groups, because the initiation is a real phenomenon. It's a real sensation that I feel like you can do by yourself if you really know what you're doing and you're really confident in the fact that you know yourself. But that's a separate topic. We're going to come back to it in later lectures, and sorry to steal everyone's time. Now let's move on. The fifth type of binding: borrowing traits and skills and aspecting. I put this one as number 5 because I put them in order of danger. Why did I put this one above the one that can kill you? This is what people always say to me. The only thing that is more important than your life is your soul. And if you borrow traits and skills from other people and that energy gets into you and it affects you the wrong way, then you can change on a very fundamental level. You could even, you know, maybe it's the last time for your reincarnation, but now that you've brought this energy in, that's it. You have to start over from the beginning. Like, it could really, it can really disturb you. It can make you feel empty. It can give you depression, literally in the clinical sense, a lack of direction or motivation. Again, it can change your personality and voice and mannerisms, that kind of stuff. It can also cause a loss of empathy or increased empathy. It can cause disassociation from self and a desire to kill yourself. So in this case, it's dangerous because it can corrupt your true self. You can lose yourself to the magic if you're not careful. It can also, I should have listed here, cause dilution, specifically aspecting. If you aspect the deities and you don't do it exactly correctly, then you can kind of be stuck feeling like a deity, and it can like mess with your ego and make you feel like you're more important than you are, like you're better than other people. It can ruin relationships. It can ruin lives. It seriously is some dangerous stuff. And if you don't think that this is scary, then get your head out of Hollywood, because it is. When you get to the point in your life where you're looking at a mirror and you can't even recognize yourself, and you see lifelessness behind your eyes, or you're staring at the barrier in your brain between sanity and insanity, and you're like, I could become real in an alternate reality. I know it, but what would be left of me here would be a shell, a crazy person. I'd be in a white room the rest of my life in this reality. It's scary. It is one of the few times in my life that I've actually been scared of something. I'm not one to get scared, but it is. I don't even know how to explain it. And I pray that with my guidance and with careful approach, you'll never be at this point. You know, that you won't have to just kind of mess with things. And this was the danger for me for learning witchcraft on my own and not being able to initiate in a coven, is that there's a lot of things that can go wrong. And in a lot of ways, I just got really lucky. And I think that it's important that you guys really heed my warnings here and be very careful and don't try anything like this until you're more experienced. And I was even experienced when I did this, and still I got this kind of emptiness and this lack of direction sticks with me even to this day. So it's something to really watch out for. Now, so you're not invoking the energy still, even in this, you're borrowing the energy. So you're pulling the energy towards you, kind of encircling yourself with it. It's like an illusion. It's like to make others think that you're better at something than you are. So one time I borrowed my friend's singing voice because I had a sore throat and I was doing a solo for my a cappella group. it's not like I sounded any differently, but people in the audience were more receptive to what they were hearing. They liked it better. I tricked them into thinking I had a better sound, and with her energy, I did really do. I had a better sound. I was able to experience and put my muscles and my throat and all of the things that go into singing, I was able to put them in just the right way so that the energy or the sound came out better and people perceived it better, and everything went a lot better. And while I was doing this, she wasn't able to talk. And afterwards, she comes up to me and she's like, "I should slap you." That's what she said to me. She was actually the high priestess who I did my dedication to Wicca under, but our coven immediately fell apart after that, and that's why I never initiated into any group. So she came up to me and she's like, "I should slap you. I know what you did." And I was like, "I'm sorry, I was really desperate." So that was before I really knew what I was doing, and that's why I kind of like had so many of these issues, is that if I had taken more precautions and made sure the energy stayed outside of my circle and that kind of thing, I would have been better off. Again, but you're just like blending your energy with the energy that you've borrowed before it gets sent out. And others might perceive you to have a different aura color. They might perceive you. It's like an illusion. It's like an illusion spell, like illusion magic, and all the video games and stuff would be this kind of magic if that was real life. But obviously, in real life, it looks a lot different. It works a lot differently. It's more natural and less supernatural, but it's a similar concept. So that's it for binding. If you guys have any questions on that, let me know. Please, I can't stress enough, don't try binding types 4 and 5, please. Okay, I've said it enough times. On to cursing. Curse people as much as you want. It's way less dangerous. Cursing, when you're not binding, okay, means that you're putting physical or metaphysical barriers in that person's path. So instead of saying, "I'm going to make sure that you can't act," it's like because you have depression and you don't have the motivation to act, I instead will put a barrier in front of you. I'll have you get hit by a car on the way to work. Okay, that would be an example of a curse that doesn't use binding. Curses can be used to banish energies, to harm people for revenge, which is almost never a good idea to do that. But the most common way is to defend oneself, and even the Gardnerian, which is the whole harm none in our read. A lot of people might interpret that actually to mean that if you harm another witch, they will harm you back. But you could harm anybody who's not a witch just fine. Like, there's other ways of interpreting that read that are a little mind-boggling to me because it seems pretty obvious, and it harmed none, but people have different perspectives and they interpret things a different way, and that's why in our group we allow people to do what they want. If you think that being a witch and cursing other people is allowed, then that doesn't make you not a witch, so just be careful. And remember the rule of 3. Because everything has an equal but opposite reaction. You send out negativity, and it will return to you 3 times. Why is it 3 times? Because every action you do is on 3 levels: physical, emotional, and spiritual. Okay, the part of you that has a body, the part of you that has emotions, which is less physical but still kind of physical, and the part of you that is purely metaphysical, that exists on the higher planes. Okay, when you do any sort of magic, it's happening on all 3 of those levels at once, even if you don't think it is. That's why you can feel the magic physically. That's why you have to have an emotional sensation to do the spell. Okay, that is why. Because in order to do the magic, it's on all 3 of these levels. So when the energy comes back to you, it will come back to you on all 3 of the levels. And that's where the rule of 3 comes from. So whenever you're doing cursing, bear it in mind. Okay, most people curse others as a form of protection. They want to just banish them, get them out of their lives. Maybe they've tried conventional banishing. They've tried the spell I showed you at the beginning where it's like, go take your bullshit elsewhere, but that wasn't strong enough. So now they're going to actually be like, if you don't leave me alone, I'm going to make you suffer. Okay, and then the person doesn't leave them alone, so they do a curse that puts them in a car accident. Now they're in a hospital and they can't even think about stalking you anymore because they're too busy worried about whether or not they're going to live or die. So that's the kind of thing that people use curses for. I have personally cursed people once. I have cursed one person. I did it in a rage. I wanted to know exactly what it felt like to do a curse, and I'll tell you from personal experience, it feels terrible. It feels terrible. I would never do it again. There is always a better way. That's just my opinion, though. If you want to do curses, go right on ahead. Don't try to curse anyone in my coven. Don't try it. But if you curse other people, go ahead. I don't care what you do. You know, I'm not here to tell you what's right and wrong. Just here to give you the skills to be the best you that you can be. Whatever that means for you. Okay, so how do you do it? The success hinges on dedication and assuredness. Would you be willing to do to this person physically as you would to them through magic? If you want a person to die through magic, you have to be willing to actually stab them in the heart. If you couldn't stab a person, you could not kill them with magic. It's that simple. You have to be so invested in what you're doing that there's no doubt in your mind you want it to happen. Likewise, you have to ask, are you guilty of the same acts prompting the cursing? Because if you are, you might inadvertently curse yourself out of guilt, and that is something you have to watch out for. If you have any amount of subconscious guilt, any kind of doubts that the spell should not work because you don't really want to kill this person, it's not going to work. And then the last thing to consider is, do you still consort with or desire to consort with this person? Do not curse someone you want to consort with, because it can hurt you. The famous example is LaVey helped this woman curse her ex-husband. And he said to her, don't you ever speak to him again. This is a powerful curse. Don't speak to him again. She went out and spoke to him, and while they were driving somewhere together to talk about something that happened, they got in a car accident and they both died. If you want to consort with this person again, don't curse them, because the curse can affect you. Curses are for people you don't know. They're for people who have really wronged you, who you are sure you never want to speak with again. And usually they're only for protection. Again, but you can do whatever you want. This is what I'm saying you should consider before you decide to curse someone. That's all. And again, if you don't want that person to actually be hurt, you wouldn't physically hurt them yourselves. It's not going to work. Some things that you use for curses, mostly it's baneful herbs. You can use blood and stuff like that, but that's not usually for curses. That's more for like getting spirits or demons to come to you if you want them to do your dirty work for you, which is dangerous in the moment. It's dangerous for you to bring the demon to you, but it's safer in the long run because a demon's not going to accidentally hurt you in the process as long as you're very clear in the commands you give him. Or her, they don't really have gender, but because it's chaos is not gendered. But if you actually want to do a curse like yourself and that kind of stuff, usually you would just rely on baneful herbs. Baneful herbs are technically just herbs which are hazardous, that you can't consume by mouth or inhale or you'll die. I have a list of some herbs that are baneful that are not used for baneful magic, and those are in the description again, like in the extra notes on the slide. So if you go through the slides not in presentation mode, you'll see that. And some of these herbs that I have listed here, they'll even be used for other things as well. So, an example is obviously like cinnamon and mistletoe. Obviously those aren't just used for cursing, they have lots of uses. Allspice, even bayberries, another one of those. Okay, so I have it broken down here on what you want to do. Banishing, urine, wormwood, acid. You can go through this whole list yourself. You can cause ill health, like mental ill health, like depression or lack of motivation, that kind of thing. Again, be very careful with these baneful herbs. Some of them you shouldn't even touch because you can absorb it through the skin. Aconite, which is also called monkshood or wolfsbane, that's one of them. You have to wear gloves when you pick it. Don't even touch it. Seriously, these herbs can cause death. Like aconite, you get enough of it on your skin and you can literally you'll be hospitalized. So it's dangerous. Now, some of these you can order online. Some of them are against the law. What's an example of that? Ambergris, for ending relationships. Ambergris is against the law because it's actually, it can be used for like date rape. Like it's like for real. So you can use that in a spell to get someone to cheat on their partner. And then all you'd have to do is just be there at the right time, right place, take a picture, show it to them, end of relationship, right? So that's an example of a curse that you could do. These are like I don't know why you'd ever want to do that. Like, I mean, if you're trying to hook up with the person who you're breaking up, like, what do you think, that they're going to just like immediately trust you after you're like, oh, look what your girlfriend is doing? Like, it's like, I don't know. But I'm trying to refrain from judging, and I think that you should do whatever feels right for you. But these kinds of things are things I personally don't really mess with. Maybe a poppet I could see, but the herbs here for poppets, binding are specifically to make like voodoo dolls and the kind of poppets where I almost called this section torture, but this is for like the kind of poppets where you like stick pins in them or drown, put them in so that they feel like they're drowning, that kind of, so pretty nasty stuff. There's 2 herbs here that are good for attracting demons. Angel's trumpet, which if you even inhale enough of the pollen from, you can have hallucinations and not pleasant ones, so be careful with that one as well. There's stories of people who fell asleep under the angel trumpet trees and then didn't wake up. So it's dangerous. And barberry also attracts demons. And so when you're doing curses, think black candles, bubbling cauldrons, filled with poisonous herbs, the stereotypical witch. Why is that the stereotypical witch? Because during the burning times, which they shouldn't even really be called that because most of the witches were hung, but during the burning times, you were only really prosecuted for consorting with the devil and being diabolical, consorting with the devil or committing what's called acts of maleficia. So they didn't really care if you were practicing magic to heal people. They only really cared if you were burning down, cornfields and cursing kings and consorting with the devil and going to black Sabbaths and eating babies and that kind of stuff. Now, obviously, there's been a lot of ridiculous things, like people have, confessed to flying on brooms. And if you look at the old laws, you'll understand why. And I actually have a link to the old laws in this slide or the previous one, because a lot of people say you shouldn't curse people because the old laws forbid it. And they forbid it for very specific reasons. So that's another thing you can check out if you download the slides and you look at the comment section. Okay, so that's the end of the actual material. I know this was a long lecture. I'm really sorry. This is a lot of homework. It's because we combined 2 weeks into one. And please take your time to do all of these things. This is the toughest week. Again, please don't mess with types 4 and 5 of binding if you're really not sure you know what you're doing. If you've worked with the Fae before or you have Fae blood, it's a little different, okay? But demons, spirits, leave them, okay? It's not important. Like, it takes a lot of energy, a lot of focus, and it can be really hard to awaken those parts of yourself, so please be careful. And reach out to me. I will do a separate lecture series specifically on necromancy probably next because a lot of people are interested in it, and we'll have a textbook. We'll have different books for that and stuff. And in the future, I'm going to eventually write my own book that references all of these things, and then that will become the official textbook for the Covenant of the Open Mind. But for now, and I'll probably, these are good things to read. So, like, I've given you the most important parts of each of these books, the parts that have the least controversial things. The Natural Magic by Urine Valiant is like the classic. She's called the mother of modern witchcraft. Gerald Gardner, he's the founder of Wicca. So this book here that I want you to read, High Magic's Aid, is actually fiction. When it was published, witchcraft was illegal, so he published it as fiction, but it reads like non-fiction, and it's very dense and hard to get through, and that's why I only gave you 4 chapters, because it's a long book, and a lot of people really don't like Gardner's writings. But I'll say this, his fiction is much better than his non-fiction, and I have no idea why that is, but his fiction is pretty good. I have the background of the characters here, so you're not confused. Morven is a true witch by lineage. She was rescued by Jan and Olaf III, these 3 guys, because they need her help to retake Jan's kingdom. He's a fallen king, or his ancestors were kings or something like that. They established this all in the beginning, and they rescue Morven in the beginning, and they find out her story is that she had to watch her mother die, and she was kept in a prison cell, and they finally let her out, and she pretended not to be a witch for many years. But she had the tools that they needed to do magic. She had the athame and the boline, however you say that. So Thur, who's a studied ceremonial magician, was made into a witch by Morven. So was Jan. They were both initiated to become high priests, and then they gather all these people together, and they collect all of the witches, and they wind up taking a whole kingdom together and ruling it as witches, and it's supposed to be a safe haven for witches. And there may be a scientific basis in this, because the King of Solomon used a lot of magic, King Solomon. So I don't know, though. You can't bank on the stuff written by Gardner, and his works are largely based off of Margaret Murray too much, because back then anthropology was much more of an art. Today it's a lot more of a science. You have to really cite things, and there's carbon dating and things like that to really help make us fully understand what it is that happened in the past. But back when these people were studying it, it was a lot harder to know what was real and what wasn't. So take it all with a grain of salt. Take the parts you like, leave the rest. That's what I'd say. But these chapters specifically really do a good job of demonstrating magic, ceremonial magic specifically. In one chapter they summon a demon, another chapter they charge sigils, another chapter is about just doing a basic music spell and how that would look in real life. It's a very, very good illustration of what real life magic looks like. Like, nailed it. Really good. Highly recommend these 4 chapters, even if you don't want to read the whole book because it's dense and hard to get through. But if you really like fiction, it's a good book. I really enjoyed it, so I'd recommend reading it. There's 2 PDFs here. One is the Fairy Reiki PDF. This one contains a full history of Avalon, but I don't have you reading that because it's kind of long and I don't know if that's important to you. But if you read pages 1 through 4 and 16 through 19, then you'll see a bunch of sigils that some people who work with fairies have come up with and how you can use them. That's just one way of doing things. You could come up with your own sigils and meet your own fairies as much as you like. The first 4 pages are like associations and what fairies like and where you can find fairies and how you can attract them. So I definitely recommend that. We have some people in the coven who are interested in fairy magic. We have some who are practiced in fairy magic. So I think they're going to work on some blog posts and stuff for people as well if you're interested in fairies in the long run. Then we have the Lesser Key of Solomon. It gets pretty dark, and there's a lot of demons, different kinds of demons, what they do and stuff in there. So I have you just reading kind of like the description. It's written by Aleister Crowley, who is very, he's very influential in the development of modern magic. He was known as the Beast because he was very big on sex magic, which is one of the chapters I think I have you reading from Doreen Valiant, so she'll talk about that. So you don't have to go into too much detail with the demons, but it is nice if you just kind of like read the overview section and understand kind of like what the Book of Goetia includes and what goetic magic is, and then you can kind of like just get a sense for like where you would look if you needed to ever work with demons for some reason. That one's more optional. If you're not interested in demons at all, you don't even want to think about them, you can cut that one out. Finally, the things that you actually need to do and turn in to me if you want credit for this week or this portion of the course. You have to send me, you should have sent me, I didn't receive any incantations from anyone yet, so hopefully some people will still send them, but send me your revised incantations or your unrevised ones if you still haven't sent them, and we'll go over them and fix them up and make sure that the associations and incantations are all right for the basic spell work. And then this time around, I want you to actually take time to perform the 2 spells and be sure to record them in your Book of Shadows. Additionally, moving on to the advanced spell work, I want you to try creating a sigil for protection, which is an extremely important thing to do. And then you can have your family and friends try it out. You know, give them the key. See if it's easy for them to unlock it. See if they can actually feel something when they use it. If they don't feel secure, if they don't feel calm, then it's not working. So, you know, one of our members of the coven said when I did a calming spell, and she was actually taking a nap while I sent the calm energy to her because she was really freaked out by current events. In the dream, I came into her dream and I was just like a bastion of calmness, you know, and like that's the kind of thing that you'll experience if you're having like a magical calm come over you, is that it'll just be like this, it'll feel kind of like a foreign influence inside of you that is like, calm down, you're okay, you know. I want you to also write one spell which makes use of the second type of binding, so go back and review what that is, make sure you understand it, write any kind of spell you want that has to do with that. It could be, you know, enchanting, it could be, you know, whatever. Note the difference between working with your own energy and another's. So if you're doing any kind of binding that involves pulling other energy in or having other energy swirl around you, just realize what it feels like. It's a lot harder than directing your own energy, you know. So that's something I want you to take note of. Maybe if you're interested in writing a blog post about your experiences, that might help. So give it a try. Let me know if you have any questions or problems. Once you're done with this section, you're basically a fully qualified witch. Unless you want to understand divinity. If you want to go the step further and understand divinity and invocation and initiation, then that is really the Wicca portion, and that's what we're going to be focusing on next. If you don't want to do a Wicca path, you want to do something slightly differently, that's fine too. Just let me know and reach out, email covenoftheopenmind@gmail.com. And we can work out, you know, what kinds of homework assignments you would do instead. But because this is a course on Wicca, I'm going to assume the people watching it want to become Wiccans specifically. So most of the rest of the work will be path work specific, though we will cover things like initiations and stuff that apply to everyone. Okay, well, I know this was long. I'm sorry. But let me know if you have any questions. And good luck, guys. Blessed be.